Okay, so you've created your flower heads and now you're ready to add the stems. You can do this in a few different ways, and you can be as creative or as simple as you want to in this step as in all steps. So if every single circle that you placed already is going to represent a flower, then each circle is also going to need a stem. You can, if you want, use a pencil and draw out where the stems are going to be placed. If this is the first time that you're making one of these pictures, you might want to go ahead and do that. You're not going to see the pencil marks, and it might just serve as a guide. They're actually somewhat easy to miss sometimes when you have a lot of different flowers in your picture. So you might want to just go ahead and do that. You could even paint them on or marker them on if you want them to be a darker color behind your paper. That's entirely up to you. I normally don't do that. I usually just cut my pieces of paper and then place them as you're going to see me do in a few minutes. Another thing you can do is not have them go straight down. Most of the ones I do, I have the stems go straight down. I like the look of the retro flower, and it's not quite the same when they're curved. And I'll show you an example. On one of the other pieces that I'm doing to show you, this is the one with the painted background. You can see here that I've decided to curve a few of the pieces, and that's because the imagining I have, let me move that up a little bit. The imagining I have for how I'm going to finish the piece, I want everything to kind of move in that direction. So that worked well for this one. As well as this picture, I am not planning on doing any kind of a base, which is the step that I'm going to be covering in the next video. So you can be creative with that as well. You can make them bend, you can make them sway, you can make them wrap around each other. You can do anything that you can imagine. It just gets a little bit trickier. You'll have to bend the pieces a bit differently, and I'm not going to be covering that in these videos, but if you're familiar with quilling at all, I'm sure you can figure that out. Another option, well, I guess I'd like to talk a little bit about color. When you're picking out your colors of paper for the stems, have in mind the finished look you're going for. So this is the piece that I've been working on that I'm doing from start to finish for this video. With this piece, I chose really bright and bold colors. My background's going to be pretty bold. I want everything to kind of contrast with each other. So in a complementary way. So for this picture, I've chosen some very bright greens. I'm doing sour pucker, Peking pistachio, split pea soup, and then appletini. I'm going to do 4 colors for this picture, but I want to show you a couple different options or ways that you can think about doing it as well. So the one that I showed you before, this one, I chose much darker colors. There's actually 4 different colors in this picture. 2 of the browns are very similar, so they might not pick up on camera. But I chose to just have one light green to kind of pop out of this sea of dark stems. And the background for this picture, I'm imagining something very bright and light and vivid. So I wanted them to kind of be stark and a little bit dreary against the rest of the picture. So that's why I chose that. But here's another example of one where where everything's very, very bright, and I decided to keep in the same vein with the stems on this. And this one it actually has 3 colors too, but once again, 2 of the greens are pretty similar, so it probably won't show up too much on camera. And this one is actually the one that has the same background and how I'm doing it differently. So you'll see how having the same background doesn't necessarily dictate what the picture is going to look like in the end. But that's another option. And then lastly, I wanted to show you the 4th picture I'm working on and how vastly different it is from the other ones. I decided to not make this one, not that any of them are literal, obviously. It's crazy colored paper, but in this one, I wanted something that's more representational of flowers, less literal, I guess, for lack of a better word. You know, there's no flowers that have white and gray stems, but I wanted something that was a little bit more stark and an even more modern view. You know, definitely more abstract. So you can even do that. You could go completely crazy and make them purple or anything you want. You know, your imagination is the only limitation to how your picture is going to turn out. So that's just something to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is the base that you're going to be creating on the next one. So I'm just going to kind of, let me find my pencil. For this picture, I do plan on having a base, and I'm going to do just kind of a basic plain base, just sort of a darkened section across the bottom. So, but you can do that in other ways as well. You can round it, you can slant it, you can do it however you want to do it. And however your base is going to be is probably going to have some impact on where you want your stems to be. So if you were having a rounded base, you might want them, you know, the stems kind of coming off the hill, or if you had your base being on the side or sloping, you know, maybe you want all your stems kind of pointing in that direction. You know, that's entirely up to you too. For this one, I'm going to just keep it very simple. I'm just going to have a, you know, a base. I normally do not draw this out. It doesn't really, I've made so many of these in my head, it just doesn't really matter for me. But I'm going to do it here just so you can kind of see what I would do if I was doing it. So, okay, so this line, the pencil line that I just drew in, is going to represent my color change shift in when we get to the shading portion. So after I put on my stems, I'm then going to go in and fill in the base. But we'll, like I said, we'll cover more of that in the next video. But still, I just want the line to be behind my my stems. It'll just make it easier so I don't ruin any paper going in with a pencil and trying to, and I just got that, and trying to make a line later. Okay, so now all you need to do is gather your supplies. You're going to definitely need your quilling paper. And once again, I'm using the Culture Pop paper. It's 17 inches long, 1/4 inch wide. So these strips are all going to be cut in half. So when I refer to that, I'm cutting a 17-inch strip of paper in half. They don't have to be exact. You can do it however you want. The other supplies you're going to need, of course, are scissors, a quilling tool, and glue. And then one other item that I find extremely helpful, particularly in this part of the process, are little nippers. You can get these from any like beauty department. They're actually cuticle nippers. But how I use them is when we're making these little marquee shapes, sometimes when you glue them together, the edges don't meet up quite right. You're making them so quickly that you know, sometimes you just misstep. Well, these are great for just snipping off that little part so that they lay flat. If they don't lay flat, it makes it just more difficult. So go ahead, gather your supplies, and then we'll get ready. Okay, I've gathered up all my supplies. Normally in my quilling, I don't pre-make shapes before placing them. I usually do one at a time, roll it, place it, glue it. The stems in this type of project are one exception though. I actually like the centers to be a bit more loose. So I like to pre-roll them, and I will roll them all up. And then when I'm done with that specific color, I'll go ahead and glue them all, and then I will shape them all, and then I place them all. So I have one more color to do. I'm just going to cut the ends where the glue is. do that over here. And then I'm going to cut my 17-inch strips in half, like that. So I'm not going to roll all of these up right now. I'm going to show an example and then I'll speed things up while I go through the rest of the process. So I'm just going to roll it. One important thing to consider while doing this is to keep your tension very loose. I normally roll my coils really tight. I like very dense coils. But for this, you want the stems to be thin. So the looser they are, the better. So I keep it really loose. So if I was doing this normally, I would go ahead and just set that aside. I would do the whole colors and then I would come back and glue it. But for the purposes of this project, I'm just going to glue it now, shape it, and place it. And like I said before, I have 4 different colors of green I'm using in this project. This is the apple teeny. And then I'm going to just create a marquee, but instead of just a marquee, I'm really going to squeeze it so it's super tightly coiled. We want it as thin as you can. It's going to open up a little bit as it sits in the glue, but still as tightly as you can. Then when you glue it, you're going to want either a toothpick or one of these great glue bottles, and I coat the bottom of it. I try to get every little bit. Just going to turn it. I'm going to go ahead and do this one right here. And I just place it. Okay. So once my piece is entirely matted, what you're going to see of the quilling is above this light blue line, right? Because that's where my mat's going to go. So I'm going to actually take this beyond that so that there's no gaps of any kind. If you are not going to use a map, or it's not a map, a mat, you're going to need to get it exactly to the edge. If it goes beyond, it won't fit in the frame. You can do one of 2 things. You can just make a really small, like if you have a little bit at the end, just a really small marquee. But the benefit to putting as much glue on as I did is once it's all entirely dry, you can use the nippers that I showed you before, or scissors if you have scissors that can get up that close. These, and you can actually just go ahead and cut it and it will not fray apart because it was all entirely glued down. So that's something to consider if you're going to be framing without a mat. Okay, we're just going to let that open and you'll see what I'm talking about in just a moment. Do that really tight again. Now, when I'm joining another piece, what I like to do is put a dot of glue on the end there. For some reason, when you glue these down, they have a tendency to just like shift a little bit. It's probably because of the amount of glue that we're working with here. So I like to not only have it glued down to the bottom, but also just touching the one above it. So it's just anchored in twice. Just like that. Now you won't see the glue come up, so don't use a lot. You just want it a little bit and towards the very bottom, just so it touches and it's going to stay. And that's essentially all you're doing. And you're going to do that for everyone. Just kind of vary the colors in whatever pattern you want, whatever is pleasing to your eye and goes with the way that you want your finished picture to look. I'm going to go ahead and cool the rest of this up and place all my pieces, shape and place them. I'll speed this up so you can watch me do that, and if I come up with anything as I go along, I'll stop it and let you know. Okay, so I'm almost done, but not quite. I just wanted to stop the rolling for a minute to explain that when you're placing these pieces, since we're using a set length, a half a strip each, when you're placing them, you might notice that that there are some places where the gap is too small for an entire strip to fit. So I've just broken off some little bits and made a few little pieces to fill in those gaps. And you're just going to have to kind of eyeball it and then just sort of fit them in where they need to be to finish that off. I usually do that at the end so that it just seems to kind of go faster. There. And then when I'm done with this, we'll be ready to move on to the next step. And you know, these don't have to be super perfect. When you look at them, they're going to look wider than you necessarily want to be, at least some of them. You might see like some little gaps where I forgot to glue the end and things like that. You really don't have to fret about it. I always say that while making a piece, I always think it's going to look awful until it's done, and then it always works out. And once we start placing the pieces to fill it in, it will just come together because of the tension and the tightness of the coils that we're putting in to fill in the mosaic. It's going to push in the paper and it's going to make everything look just perfect. So you really don't have to worry too much about it, you know. And there's just no such thing as a mistake. Just do the best you can, and I think it's more important to pay attention to the fact that you like the colors and the placement and that sort of thing. So, okay, so all of my stems now are in place. In the next video, part 3, I'll be showing you how to add the base in a few different ways. We'll do that, and then it's on to the shading. So thanks for joining me again, and I'll see you in part 3.